Analysis. Shortage soon. Panic buy here. This presentation begins with understanding the difference between a republic and a democracy. Aristotle says that a democracy is the decayed form of a republic. He also says that whereas the end goal of a republic is virtue, the end goal of a democracy is equality. So whereas a republic encourages excellence, a democracy tries to equalize everybody, with French philosopher Gabriel Marcel saying that this is why democracies push people down to a common level of mediocrity. It's far easier to push people down than to raise everyone up. Like in Sweden, which threatened the job of a lunch lady because she baked fresh food for her students. As you can see here in this article, lunch ladies slammed for food that is too good. We read, a talented head cook at a school in central Sweden has been told to stop baking fresh bread and to cut back on her wide-ranging veggie buffets because it was unfair that students at other schools didn't have access to the unusually tasty offerings. This is part and parcel of what happens when a republic collapses into a democracy. The excellent is denounced as elitist and unfair, while the mediocre is celebrated as an achievement of mass equality and social justice. It's important to remember, too, that our word socialism is new. It was coined only in the 1830s by Charles Fourier. The word for the same concept, before then, was democracy. In politics, when Aristotle describes democracies, he says that they're the backward states of demagogues who rise to power promising people free food, free housing, and free healthcare. He also describes Phallius of Chalcedon, who promised equality in the form of equal land for everyone. This fell apart when population increases caused him to start attacking neighboring city-states to get more land to fulfill that promise. At any rate, this is why the Founding Fathers in America unanimously denounced democracy. They were classically educated men. To them, it was what we mean by socialism. And it's always accompanied by charlatans and mass murder, such as the French Revolution with its reign of terror in the 1790s. The founders of our republic saw the bloodshed in communism and were appalled. In fact, speaking of communism, the Bolsheviks in the Russian Revolution carried out as one of their first acts the erection of a statue of French revolutionary leader Robespierre. They said that his Jacobins were the forerunners of the 20th century's Bolsheviks, and they were right. But just as France collapsed and Robespierre was beheaded by the same violent forces he unleashed, so did Soviet Russia fall. Why? The celebration of incompetence. Just as in France, revolution was married to famine as supply chains collapsed due to the competent being executed as enemies of equality. Watch Canadian firebrand Kate Wan describe how this happened in the Ukraine after the Soviets conquered them.
This is there's a big potential for very big disaster as a consequence to that in numerous ways. But one thing that comes to mind I was talking about earlier is the Holodomor, which happened in the Ukraine, during the Soviet era, where basically all of the borders around Ukraine were shut. They decided to collectivize the farms, so to control the supply chains. And then there was a drought. And all of these conditions were basically set up. They were shooting farmers who didn't want to take part of the program. They were killing people. And then people just ended up starving. When they collectivized the supply chain of food, what ends up happening is anytime you have central planning trying to organize all of this, they're completely inept and they end up messing everything up. And so there ends up being shortages. You combine that with a drought and killing everybody who actually knows what they're doing. And it's funny that taking an example like that would be so extreme.
Between 6 to 9 million people starved in what was one of the 20th century's big atrocities. By the way, notice any supply chain issues lately? Right now, we're dealing with disruptions because incompetent bureaucrats are using various techniques and new sketchy requirements to cobble together a pretext to drive the best people out of healthcare, out of industry, out of the military, and out of public life. To go by history, they're setting up a predictable outcome. These are the same people now removing gifted and talented programs in schools and stigmatizing excellence. What we're watching is the controlled demolition of a society. The aforementioned philosopher Gabriel Marcel has a chapter in Man Against Mass Society entitled The Loss of Freedom. He talks about how the bureaucracy takes over administrative control of the country little by little, piece by piece, outside of the parameters of the Constitution. Instead of your elected leaders making decisions, they forget that they answer to their constituents and instead say, well, we had to do it. The Department of Health said so, or the CDC said so. The Department of Health and the CDC are employees, and unelected employees. Representatives are not there to serve them, but to serve the voters who put them in office. But this switcheroo has happened, where the bureaucrats think that the government exists for them and not for you. where the unelected are running it and not the public servants that you sent to make decisions. This new shadow government is what we call the deep state. And most normal people, says Gabriel Marcel, are so busy working that they barely notice the transition from their authentic constitutional government to rule by this government bureaucracy and or corporate state. And let's be honest, most of these bureaucrats are in revolving door situations with massive companies. So this is the corporate takeover of a formerly constitutional republic. As the corporate state, through the bureaucracy, takes over, they restrict more and more freedoms. I saw a meme recently whose theme was, "You think you're free, but 125 years ago, you didn't have to ask the government permission to collect rainwater, go fishing, own a property, start a business, get married, protest, and so forth." The average person is completely unaware of just how many of his rights that he's lost. As Alvin Toffler points out in The Third Wave, this deep state takeover usually takes place via licensing and permitting, like the Constitution telling you that you have a right to bear arms and that this right is inalienable. It's a right you derive from God, not from government, and no government has the authority to grant it or take it away. Yet through the bureaucracy, people have been falsely led to believe that they need to spend more money to purchase an additional permit for the right that the Constitution says that they already have. As I said in a previous video, it's like a con man selling a bridge to a sucker that he doesn't own. You think you need a permit to earn a living, but do you? You're now being told that your constitutional right to petition your government or your school board makes you a domestic terrorist. Does it? There are people telling you now that they can restrict your oxygen and others are in control of your body. Is that constitutionally so? As Marcel says, the people scarcely pay attention when suddenly they require a permit to do this or a license to do that, and even if they do assert their rights, they're told that their individual liberties are selfish. They don't align with the mob rule philosophy of democracy that says that the whims, prejudices, and fears of the majority outrank the individual liberties of ordinary citizens. And herein you see another distinction between a republic and a democracy. Republics are there to protect individual liberties. Democracies don't recognize individual liberties since they're essentially mob rule. When liberties that once belonged to the people freely are now being charged and metered, Marcel writes, "The only natural end to such a process is military or economic catastrophe. Such catastrophes occur at the moment when a society whose constitution is insensibly degenerated becomes absolutely paralytic. It collapses." Participants who used the New American Magazine reported that they experienced 12% more muscle mass, 22% more smiles from attractive strangers, and a 72% reduction in cognitive decline. Check us out at thenewamerican.com.